Hi guys, it's Nell from Arty Farty Retreat. I'm going to be showing you today just some very basic skills to use with your watercolour painting. Will hopefully give you a bit of texture and a bit of depth. It's been incredibly hot in Tunbridge Wells this week, so hopefully the watercolour paints will dry quite quickly and I can do this in no time at all and get back to drinking ice cold margaritas. Okay, so the first few things that you're going to need is your watercolour paper. I've just used block watercolour paints for this one. Jar of water. I've got some watercolour pencils. We're going to use those a bit later. I've also got some salt. This is a kind of sea salt, but you can use any salt. I've also got some masking fluid. This one's from Winsor & Newton. There are different types of masking fluid that you can get out there. To be honest, they mostly do the same thing. So we're going to use that later. I've got my paintbrush and a pen so that I can just write down all the different techniques for you. So we'll move on to the first one. Okay, so the first one that we're going to use is the masking fluid. Because we need to allow that a bit of time to dry, so I'm going to do that first. So we'll do that here. That's your masking. So give it a good shake, because as you can see it congeals on the bottom. So give it a good shake round. Okay. Good child safety capture on there. And so what we're going to do is just paint anything on there. I might do a bit of a squiggle. It's quite thick actually, probably needs a bit more shaking. You can get nibs for masking fluid as well. So there we go. So you can get a real fine point on it. There we go. So once this is dry, what we're going to do is paint over the top of it, and you'll see the effect later on. Okay, so now we've used our masking fluid. Put that back. And I just want to show you what the watercolour paint, particularly the blocks, looks like just on dry paper. So this hasn't been wetted, it hasn't been stretched, it's just dry paper. So this is on dry. Okay, so if we wet, I think I'm going to go for all one colour today, so you can see the effects. I'm going to go for blue. So I've just literally wet a bit of the top there. I'm going to use the true colour. I'm not going to do any mixing today. And this is the effect of it on dry paper. So you can get it quite thick. You can obviously water it down a bit more, but you can get quite a pointed, quite clear lines with dry, painting straight on dry paper. Okay, so the next one I'm going to show you, I'm just going to give my brush a little bit of more of a rinse in there, is on wet. So we're going to paint the exact same kind of squiggles, but on wet paper. So this is on wet. So what I'm going to do is take some water from my jar here. Luckily I haven't used it too much, so it's not too saturated with pigment. I'm just going to roughly paint wet there, and then on the blue I'm going to grab that and we're just going to swirl on top of that wet paper. So you can see how it bleeds more into the paper and giving probably a better blended effect. So if you were doing washes of a background, you'd want to probably wet the paper first. So the next one we're going to do here is going to be wet on dry, and we're just going to do one layer and then put another layer on top. So we're going to let it dry in between. So I'm just going to get some of that pigment. Quite wet, I think. So we'll put the lighter layer first. And what we're going to do is just let that dry while we carry on, and we'll come back to that. Okay, so the next one we're going to do is get using that salt for something other than putting on your chips. So I think I'm going to use a wet background for this one. I'm just going to wet it a bit here, just so I don't have to use so much pigment, and it allows the salt to take to it as well. Okay, so get your salt. Doesn't have to be particularly expensive salt. Rock salt works quite well. And we'll just put a few grains on here. Got some quite big flakes there, so I'm just going to break that up a bit. I'll put quite a few more on there so you can really see the effect. Okay. We'll leave that to dry while we go on to the next one. So I'm going to move on to the next one, which is showing how you can layer to give depth. So it's a little bit similar to the way we work this wet on dry, but we're going to give you depth. So I'm going to do one layer and then we'll come back to it. So I'm just going to go onto dry here. So what I'm going to do is just paint a cube. I think I might have a little bit of salt in there as well. Added texture. So just going to paint a cube, and once that's dry we'll come back and give it another layer to give it a bit more depth. It is drying quite quickly today because it's so warm. So the next one that we're going to do is drop wet. So we're going to go dry, and fairly thick. We don't want it too watered down. There we go. And then what we're going to do is just rinse the paintbrush off and just drop some water droplets, and you can see how the water disperses the pigments. It's almost a bit like snowflakes. The next one we're going to do is going to involve just some kitchen towel. So let's move this here. So this one is, we're just going to put tissue. You can use any old tissue. I quite like kitchen towel because it's quite absorbent, and you just want to scrunch it. So again, just on dry, just going to get quite a nice thick pigment there, covering our area, and then using the tissue, we're just going to dab at bits. Again, you can see that it gives quite a nice effect and just gives you a bit more texture. So our layering one is pretty dry, as is the masking one actually. It just starts to feel like a little bit rubbery. It's a bit like sort of latex, if anyone's ever used latex before. So we're going to do our layering one, And we're just going to get pigment again on dry. We're just going to go for the two sides of our cube. At the top there. Okay. And again, we'll just let that dry. So I'm just going to go back to our masking one now. And again, just going to, on dry, scoot over the top of where we have put all of our masking fluid. A lot of people use masking fluid for like snow effects. You can use it to write names and things like that when you've got the finer point, or a really small brush. It works really well. So we're just going to leave that to dry and come back to it in a second. We're going to come back to our wet on dry, which I think this bit here is still a bit wet, but this bit is nice and dry. So we're just going to, again, just on dry, use a bit more water than that. You can get some really nice effects by, again, building up that layer. So much the same as you get in depth here, you can really build up those layers in a much more free, expressive way. Okay, so we're just going to look back at our salt and just see the effect that that's had. So I'm just going to brush this off. There we go. And you can see where the salt has absorbed the water, there are darker rims around where the salt has been. So it gives you quite a nice grainy effect for when you're doing sand or buildings or anything that you need that a bit more texture for. Our layering, this one here, and again just going to get some more pigment on my brush. I'm just going to do that last piece of building up another layer. There we go. So you can see that you get that real depth of where that light's coming from. So it's an easy way to build that up. So I'm just going to go back to our masking fluid and just take a look. I think it's fairly dry. So with masking fluid, all you need to do is start rubbing it just with your finger, and you can see that it starts to stretch and come off. It's a bit like old scratch cards that you used to get. You used to get all that, to be able to peel it all off. So you literally just start peeling away. And you can see that you get some very clear lines. It's very satisfying. It's like peeling skin when you have sunburn. It's just me that does that, maybe. So there you have it, 8 different techniques to give you different texture, depth in your watercolour paintings.